I wanted to kind of talk about how we ended up where we are. Part of the reason I wanted to kind of give an overview of how we learned what we know now about seam shifted wake is because there are three presentations following me, and I think that they might be more interesting than mine. And so I wanted to put a little stake in the ground and say, hey, we were here early, and also kind of give some background for those that aren't aware of how this stuff works. So way back in June 2018, I had a student that was looking for something to do. I had a system that we can measure airflow, and I asked him to fire a baseball through that system. And he came back with this picture. This was one of the very first we took. His name is Magnus Effect, by the way. And as soon as I saw it, I couldn't believe that we could see the baseball in the data, and that this was such a fantastic looking picture. We've improved a lot on it since then, but I was immediately all in. We decided to put in a video to the American Physical Society that year in a competition they have there. And as part of that, I decided to ask the question. The whole video was on what's the difference between a 2-seam and a 4-seam fastball. And as part of that effort, we fired both from this hack attack machine. And I was dismayed to learn that they went to exactly the same place because this is a 100% efficiency machine. This later became clear to me, but initially this is very confusing and a little bit dismaying when you've already chosen your topic and put in the abstract and you realize that it's going to be a struggle. For part of that same thing, we did these images on rotating baseballs and noticed that the separation point, or where the wake starts, seems to be moved around by the seams. This was our first tip-off that the seams are doing something. This was back in 2018, November. May of that year, Mike Fast from the Braves sent me 72 Major League Baseballs. That really opened things up for us. And even more importantly, Lloyd Smith from Washington State's Sports Science Lab decided to support my student and lend me one of his really excellent cannons to continue the work. So that led to this result. This was the first time that I really started talking about this. I called it seam controlled wakes. Seam shifted wakes was my student's idea. That I think is a lot catchier, at least seems to have caught on. But this is my claim back in February 2019, that if the wake of the ball is not symmetric, there's an aerodynamic force in the ball. And I think I still stand by that. Seams on the back of the ball can cause the flow to separate early or late. And you notice I've scratched off late. That's something that I realized later on was not true, leading to a shifted wake. And I sketched this map out, which has held up pretty well. Now we've got numbers to go with it, and I'll talk about a little later. My first introduction to the Sabre community was at Sabre Seminar in Boston in August 2019, where I met, I think, probably many of the people that are watching this right now for the first time. And at that time, I was convinced that this was doing something, but we hadn't been able to show it on a pitch. And I made this joke that I want to believe that this stuff's happening. Not too long after that, November 2019, we made another video for APS, and this one had Rob Friedman involved, got a lot of attention. Things started really rolling for us. Had this excellent music that, if you're a person of a certain age, elicits an immediate reaction from you. And then this was a big red letter day. January 2020 was the first time that we were able to demonstrate that the orientation of the ball relative to its axis affects where it goes. We called that the scuff ball test. We later superseded that with something that was called the looper test. Similar idea, little bit different orientation, a little bit bigger effect. But we were able to demonstrate that that we can make forces that are in the direction of Magnus and forces that are opposite, or 90 degrees from the direction of Magnus, by orienting the seams in certain ways. We were still stuck in the laboratory at that point. None of this had ever seen the light of day. But in November of 2020, I had an opportunity to work on a paper with Harry Pavlidis of Baseball Perspectives. He invited me and Alan Nathan and provided us with a really nice data set where we could see these effects happening in baseball. And since that time, I should mention, there was an article by Driveline just about a week earlier than this. And since that time, many people have jumped in with the new publicly available data. And there's really no controversy anymore, in my opinion, about these things happening. So that was a huge push forward, and kind of brought us from being weirdos working in our laboratory to the broader community, and something that most people think is real now. Real big kick for me was this game where Jared Hughes was pitching for the Mets, and you might be able to hear, I'm not sure you can hear it or not, but that's Ron Darling talking about seam shifted wake on TV. That's when I knew I'd really made it. And then, well, that's kind of the end of all that. And I'm sorry for taking so much time with it, but I thought that was an important background for this and for the rest of the talks that are coming up. And so now I'll actually get to my point. This is one of our recent images of a baseball traveling 90 miles an hour straight to the left. And there's several features that I want to point to here. What we're always concerned about is where the wake forms, where the separation point is on the top and the bottom of the ball. And in this case, the ball isn't spinning and the seams aren't doing anything. And these two separation points are about the same on both sides of the ball. The wake is symmetric. It's not pushed up or down. And there's no aerodynamic force on the ball other than drag. But if we spin the ball, we can see the Magnus effect. And this is what everybody's known about baseball for a very long time. But what that does is cause this separation point on the bottom to move forward and the separation point on the top to move backward. That introduces a pressure force, in this case, pushing the ball upward. And however, you can do that with seams also. This is a case where the ball is not spinning, but this seam is causing an early separation on the top. This on the bottom is kind of the normal separation point. We don't really, it will hang out here unless something makes it move forward. And so in this case, we have a very large force upward. I made a joke today after I saw the Turner knuckleball line drive yesterday that, is this force big? Yeah, it can be very big. And this is an example of one that's bigger than Magnus effect. The reason seam effects are typically about a third of what Magnus effects are is just because they don't happen as much of the rotation of the ball as Magnus effects do. They're not as constant. So I mentioned that map. We have now sketched this out. We have a paper on this. It extends, the region where the seams can do something extends about 6 degrees in front of a slice through the middle of the ball to about 18 degrees behind it. And so this is a slice through the center of the ball, but you can make a slice through the center of the ball at any plane you want. And if you do that, this becomes kind of a rectangular slab through the ball. If you have a seam anywhere in there, it's going to cause that early separation. And if it happens on one side of the ball and not the other, then you're going to have a force on the ball. So this is a little animation we put together just recently, and it's just showing that over this small range of different angles, we can cause the wake to move up or down. And if you watch carefully, there's an in-between where the seam on the top and the bottom is causing early separation and just a big wake with no sideways force. So you have to have it on one side and not the other. And this is, I think, a really important movie because I think a lot of two-seam fastballs basically end up in this situation where either the top seam or the bottom seam could be causing this effect, and it's easy to accidentally switch from one to the other. And I've been seeing a lot of two-seam fastballs that ride instead of get sink like the pitcher usually intends. So I want to talk a little bit about orientation. These are two baseballs spinning at 130 degrees. I'm using the Texas Leaguers Scout Spin Simulator here, and I'm going to flip to that webpage in just a second to show you a little bit of a demo. But these are both at the same axis, but one of them has more gyro than the other. This case has more gyro than the other. And what we're always trying to achieve in seam shifted wake is to have a seam that's sitting like right along this position here. And you can see that this case with no gyro, that's not happening. And I started messing around with this site the other day and I realized this is a really good demo. I'm hoping that, that you'll find this informative. Again, that ball's spinning at 130. It's the pitcher's point of view. I can flip to the catcher's point of view if I want to. And you can see that there is no, this is a two-seamer, but there's no seam that's anywhere near that edge. I get a seam that's here and a seam that's here at certain points in time, but they happen opposite of each other. And so whatever effect it causes in one direction, it's going to cancel in the other direction. But now if I come over here and say I put 10%, or cut the efficiency down by 10%, about 25 degrees of gyro. Now you can see I'm getting close here. That seam is getting close to that edge. It's still not quite there, but I can make it get there if I orient the ball a little bit differently. So now you can see that I do have a seam that's hanging out for about 3/4 of the rotation in this region. From the catcher's point of view, again, you can see it there too. And it's easy to tell when you have it where you want it to be because it looks about the same from both points of view. Now, if I go to more gyro, say I have 80% efficiency, I don't need that orientation shift anymore. I already have that thing going on. And that's why when you see pitchers that are down near 80%, they get seam shifted wake no matter what. If you're at 90%, you have to be a little bit more careful about how you do it. And I think that this explains why you see such a broad range of effects in the majors right now. Some people have this happening a lot more than others. Excuse me, than others. Okay, so there's a little bit, I probably needed a better segue here, but I want to talk about the concept of inferred axis. If you don't want to read all this text or listen to what I'm saying, this is what we've been hearing about what the axis of pitches is for the last, from whenever TrackMan started up until 2019. Every axis you saw reported was an inferred axis. It was calculated based on how the ball moved, the horizontal versus vertical movement and known RPM. You can infer an axis from a Magnus model. Nowadays, we have the actual axis measured by Hawkeye, and I'm going to call that either an observed or an optical axis, OA, either way. So IA versus OA. This is what it looks like it's doing. This is what it's actually doing. And we're going to look at cases where those don't match. There's other ways, and you're going to hear about other ways to see seam shifted wake effects from Glenn's and from Alan's talk later on. But this is still the first way we did it, and I think that the first thing I look at, it might not be the entire story, and I'll talk more about that. So Hawkeye measures spin by actually taking successive pictures of the baseball as it flies. And there's a lot of secret sauce that goes in there, and I don't know exactly how they do it, but I know that this is the input information. They have about 30 pictures or 40 pictures. I forget what the exact number is. They compute the RPM and the 3D axis from that information. If I get any of this wrong, Clay will correct me in a few minutes. So the 2D axis or tilt is currently public. Pitch by pitch, 3D axis is not currently public, although the Savant site now does have the average for each pitcher's pitch on it. And from what I can tell, these are very accurate. They're prone to obvious misreads, and any measurement system that's going to have an error, I appreciate it when it says this is obviously wrong. And the Hawkeye problems tend to be that way, where it's not subtle and it's easy to filter out. So I'm going to show you a lot of plots like this. So I have optical axis here and inferred axis like here. And this comes from photos of the baseball from Hawkeye. So just like I was mentioning just a minute ago, this comes from a Magnus model. So this is more about the way the ball moves. And if the Magnus model works, these two agree. And if it doesn't work, you'll see the data off that line. And that's our tip off that there's a seam shifted wake effect. So I want to start with an example one that's, there's obviously no seam shifted wake effect. This is Garrett Cole's fastball. He's notorious for having very high efficiency, very low gyro, and his pitches lie exactly on the line. So Kyle Hendricks is a very high on my list of seam shifted wake sinker ballers. You can see his OA and IA don't agree at all. And that basically means that ball, that two-seamer, is moving much more arm side than we would have normally expected from its Magnus movement. Jared Hughes, given name William, throws a four-seamer that has the opposite effect. And this is very common. It's going to be a theme of this talk. Four-seamers do the opposite of two-seamers when they have seam-shifted wake effects. So you can see that that's on the other side of the line. And but also notice that his optical axis or observed axis of these two pitches is almost identical. And this is common for people that throw a four-seamer and a sinker. And so this is how these two pitches look. This is thrown in his backyard. I got the four-seamer below and the two-seamer above. You can see the four-seamer gets ride, the two-seamer gets sink, and that's all shown in this plot here. So these videos were actually taken before he threw in front of a Hawkeye last year with the Mets. So more recently, all that was, I've been presenting that for a long time. So this is newer information, and I think this is really interesting. My major point here is that this two-seam versus four-seam thing extends to all pitches. It's not just fastballs. So here are changeups. These are left-handers. Most people throw their changeup two-seam, and they're left-handers, so that's going to lie to the left of this line, like Daniel Norris here. But I found this guy. He's a left-hander also, and his changeup's on the wrong side of the line. And I looked at that, and I scratched what little hair I have. And I happen to know someone that works in pitching in his team, and I asked him, hey, does he happen to throw that four-seam? And they confirmed that, yes, he does. That was, a holy cow. So we can see this in the data. And my favorite example is Kyle Hendricks. Yeah, you look at this and you say, well, he's not very good with that that changeup. It's all over the place. Well, actually, a lot of people are aware that he throws two different changeups, and one of them is two seam, and one of them is four seam. And this is we don't classify them that way. They're all classified the same. And so this red circle is showing this kind of changeup, and the blue circle is showing this kind of changeup. And they move from seams in opposite directions. So let's talk about breaking pitches, because this is really brand new. Most curveballs are thrown four seam, and they would look like this on the same optical versus inferred axis. This is Anibal Sanchez's curve, and he's a right-hand pitcher. He throws his curveball four seam, and it lies above this line, as you would expect. But there's Jose Barrios. He's also a right-handed pitcher. His curveball lies below the line. Happen to know someone in that front office, and I got this picture of his two-seam grip on his curveball. So there's a couple important points here. One is that I think a lot of pitchers don't realize they could get, if you don't have 100% efficiency on a pitch like this, and most curveballs are not, you can get it to do two different things just by gripping it 90 degrees off. And I don't think as many people are taking advantage of this as they could, like Hendricks here. So, and that takes me to the thing I really came here to talk about, which is sliders. And this is really common. First of all, if you go and look at all the data on sliders, the first thing you're going to run into is a case like this. And then the next guy I looked at looked like this. There's two different things happening here. And I made this exact face when I first saw this. What's happening here, these are very low efficiency pitches. I think this is below 20%. And this just doesn't mean very much. The axis, or the axis of the ball, when it's pretty much pointed straight towards home plate, doesn't really have that much meaning. And this is basically noise. In this case, and this is very common for sliders, Hawkeye just misreads the axis of this by 180 degrees. So you have to filter those cases out. And I did that by looking at sliders with large horizontal break, which tends to get me a list of sliders that have relatively high efficiency for a slider anyway. And you see some very popular, or very good pitchers on here and very good pitches. Most of these are, when I look at most of these, I would find that for a right-hand pitcher, that slider is below the line here. That indicates that it's thrown two seam. And I found an exception. My favorite pitcher, Brad Keller, his are all above the line, indicating that it's four seam. And somebody, it was probably Rob Friedman, I can't remember who sent me this clip, and it makes it pretty obvious that one, it moves down more than it should, and two, it's four seam. So again, I think that there's 2 points here. There's a knob here that pitchers can turn that they're probably not taking advantage of to the extent that they could. Also, I think that we need to do better on pitch classification, and everything we need to do better on that is available here. So what does all this mean? In my opinion, seam shifted wake is a costume for your pitch. It lets your pitch be something that it's not. So if your pitch wants to be Batman, now it can be Batman. So and that's a good idea. If you can be Batman, always be Batman. I wish I was in a room to see if that joke landed or not. You can use it to alter the direction, the movement in almost any direction you want. I've talked about two seam and four seam, and there's everything in between there too. Pitch classification, in my opinion, shouldn't be left up to the pitchers anymore. We can do it. We have a new tool here now to do it with, and I think we should use that. It also needs to delineate grip and the resultant orientation. And that can be seen from the Hawkeye data, as I've been showing you. So next for us, I'm working on teaching seam shifted wake to pitchers, both how grips and how to adjust gyro. The ability to do that is really important to being successful at this. We're working on a model and patenting that, which we hope to sell soon. And then diagnosing pitches in the bullpen, either through TrackMan plus Rapsodo, which is obviously pretty expensive, or, and I'm very big on this, camera-based tracking. I've had some success recently at, I think pretty accurately determining the horizontal and vertical break, release angles, release points, all that kind of stuff from video like this from a single camera. So that provides us the XYZ and time trajectory of that. So That's all I have today, and I thank you for attending and listening to me. I'm going to unshare here and try to figure out what I'm supposed to do next. So I'm clicking on Q&A. What's the best way for pitchers to utilize this information, especially if there's less than knowledgeable on the topic? If you don't like the direction of your pitch and you want it to go differently, you need to develop some gyro and then adjust your grip until it does what you want it to do. Corey Kluber is big on this. Sam is asking about him. He comes up quite a lot. How could seam shifted wake be used to teach player to throw a knuckleball? A knuckleball, I was just having this discussion with a friend the other day. A knuckleball is a it's a pitch. In fact, everything I understand about seam shifted wake, I learned from watching knuckleballs. So that is the same effect. It's the same thing. It's just that we're trying to make that happen, even though the ball is spinning. And I think I ran through all those very, very quickly. And I think I have a little more time, but should I just step aside?
Barton, that was wonderful. Seeing no more questions. I think, well, we've got one more.
Who's my favorite pitcher to work with? Well, you're giving me a lot of credit for working with a lot of pitchers. I worked a lot with Jared Hughes. We have a very good relationship. He was great because he's smart. He's very analytical. He's very methodical. He has the ability to dial his gyro up and down, which seems to be pretty rare and is really key to this whole thing. So I enjoyed that quite a lot. What percent of the time that a pitcher attempts to throw a seam shifted wake does he actually execute it? I'm glad you asked that, because I don't think anybody other than Jared Hughes and one other major league pitcher who's contacted me recently, who I won't embarrass by mentioning his name, have ever tried to do it. I had a very indirect connection to Brad Keller, who throws more seam shifted wake than anybody, really. And a reporter recently asked him what he thought about it. He said, "I don't know what it is, and I don't care to know." And I think that's smart. I mean, he's in the major leagues, so he doesn't want to spend a lot of time thinking about why it works. When I hear from people is when it stops working, and I think it happens quite often to people because they don't realize what's causing it in the first place. So I think this is going to be a player development issue. I work with more minor leaguers, and they will arrive soon in the major leagues doing this on purpose. Would pitchers be more inclined to use this information in the off season in their own training facilities rather than in season? They definitely don't want to use it in season. I think it's not something. I mean, this is a radical departure from what somebody might normally be doing, and I don't think that anybody would ever. It's not like a new grip where they're going to try it out in a game. I do think the right time to talk about it is in the off season. Since Magnus and seam shifted wake forces both shift the wake, how do they combine? That's a great and really open question at this point. It's totally not understood how they work together. We know they do, because I had an experiment where we made Magnus bigger or smaller at the same RPM with seams. So we know that they do interact, but I think it's a pretty open question as to how. Could you potentially expand more on your seam shifted wake model? Yeah, we have a model that basically examines the ball spinning. It finds whether or not seams are in that box, and then applies forces to it based on our tests. That's what we will patent. What's missing right now is accurate data on how big the forces are. But you would input the axis, the gyro, the orientation of the ball, two different numbers to describe the orientation of the ball, initial trajectory and all that. And we want to get it to the point where it predicts where the ball will go. Where can we find more of your work online? Glad you asked. baseballarrow.com is my blog. I post a lot of things there. Are there early adopters and others who are non-believers, or is this everybody starting to pay attention to this? I think people have come around to this now. I don't think that I think there are still skeptics, and there should be skeptics about whether or not this is something you want to do. I don't think there are many skeptics left on whether or not this is happening. I think it's definitely happening. And I think that there are pitchers that could improve their arsenals with it. There are probably other pitchers that, well, and best example I can think of, Trevor Bauer really put me onto this whole thing. He doesn't do it anymore. He's decided other pitchers are better for him. So other pitches are better for him. So I don't think it's necessarily always a winner. And I think we're right. I bet this conference next year is going to have a bunch of people talking about whether or not it's a good thing and how to use it right. And I think I'm going to let Scott kick me out when I have to stop reading. Should I stop reading questions?
No, you're good.
Okay. How does divergence from OA-IA intersection impact the offensive performance? There's been some recent papers on this. Driveline just had one the other day. Rob Arthur had one the other day too. And the one thing I can remember off the top of my head, Rob claimed that seam shifted wake sinkers tend to induce more ground balls, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. I tried to get him to show, I thought he would be able to show that for seam shift wake pitchers, which get extra ride, would induce more swings and misses, and they do not from his analysis. So that was disappointing to me. Let's see. How can a pitcher change speed on a knuckleball without rotation? Yeah, I don't know that one. I'm sorry. Does any MLB, MLB pitcher come to mind that you believe would benefit the most by utilizing developments? I think the people that need it, that don't have it, are people who aren't in the majors. You know, they never made it. I believe that the Kyle Hendricks model is something that we could see a lot more of if people understood this better. He is a huge user of seam shifted wake. I don't think he would be competing in the major leagues without it. And I think there are probably other pitchers like him out there that, again, to me, it's a player development issue more than anything. Seems like this could really change the game for pitchers, especially those who don't have top tier velo. That's exactly what I'm saying. If Hendricks cracks me up because people, 2 years ago, he was magic. Everybody thought, nobody really understood how he was being so competitive. But one thing I frequently heard about him is he generates a lot of movement, and it's not true. If you look at his movement numbers, they're not that good. He doesn't spin the ball that well. The nice thing about seam shifted wake is it doesn't care how well you spin the ball. So, and he's used, I think he is probably the high end right now, maybe Keller, of what this can do for you. So from what you've seen so far, do pitches in Colorado have different outcomes than expected with the seam shifted wake? I know Alan was looking at this because I prompted him to recently, and we both got pretty excited because he thought he was seeing it. And then after more careful look, I think he decided that there really isn't anything there. So I think it works in Colorado the same as it works anywhere else.